With Tesla's terrible Q1, where they reported only 387,000 vehicles delivered, which is an 8.5% decline, and BYD even reporting much worse, only 300,000 electric vehicles sold, there are now many who are saying the electric vehicle growth story's busted, and maybe it was just a blip. Well, news today showed that 31 countries have passed the pivotal tipping point of 5% of all new car sales are purely electric. This 5% is important, as it traditionally has been a signal that mass adoption of the new technology is now underway. We're going to show you a table today that lists every country and the rate of adoption of EV sales in each country. That's a table I've been waiting for a long time. So despite what is happening here in the US, it's very reassuring that the world has made this transition and it's only going to accelerate now. I've got Hans Nelson joining us. He has his own YouTube channel called Hans C. Nelson. Welcome, Hans.
Thanks for having me, Herbert.
So obviously we saw the big numbers from Tesla, 387, the small numbers, and it was shocked everybody because it was much lower than anybody's projections of what it was going to happen. There was reasons, right? There was the China macro, there was the shipping lanes that was disrupted by terrorists. There was terrorists on the arson fire of the Giga Berlin. And there was a Model 3 transition to a brand new car. All those things impacted it. But the question now is there an EV demand slowdown? Is this transition to electric vehicles just a blip, a fad, some people are calling it? Well, the reason why some people think it is because they're looking at the US, not the world. So we're going to share that data today. You've got this news from Bloomberg showing that 31 countries have now surpassed the pivotal EV tipping point. 5% of new car sales are purely electric. This 5% is a signal. It happens with all new technology. Once it hits the 5%, it accelerates its growth and it rapidly surpasses the old technology. So this is how fast is the switch to electric cars. 31 countries, 5% at this point. So this is the year after crossing the 5% threshold, the 0. And you can see that by year, and you look at the black line, that is a 12-month moving average, the average. So typically countries on average will get to 30% of cars will be electric vehicle within 3.5-4 years from now. And you can see what happened to China, the blue, and then look what happened to Germany in red. The problem is the US is still, I think we looked it up and they only hit their 5% the beginning of 2022. So 2 years ago they hit that and they're growing slower than everyone else. Look at that, just much slower. What's your thoughts about this 5% mark in 31 countries?
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight the reason, I think, for this underlying trend that we see. And that is that it's almost always a function of cost. The reason that new technologies overtake old technologies, and once they hit that 5% tipping point, they accelerate, is because they're just more competitive from a cost standpoint than whatever it is that they're displacing. And that's what over the long term really drives these adoptions. I think that, one thing to keep in mind in the trends that we've seen there is the cost of operating an ICE vehicle in basically any other country besides the United States is significantly higher than it is here, because we have the cheapest gasoline prices in the world. And so it doesn't surprise me in the least to see that the United States is kind of lagging behind some of these other countries in its EV adoption rates. And that's just because since the operation of gas vehicles is cheaper from a total cost of ownership standpoint in the United States than it is in Europe or in China, then I think our growth is actually going to lag behind those others. And we're probably not going to see something that's quite as fast here in this market specifically.
Yeah, it's odd what's happening. We'll explain why it's happening like this in the US. But the data is very interesting, right? So in 2022, only 19 countries had passed the 5%. So now it's 31. So that's pretty good growth in just 1 year. That number soared as EV spread across 4 continents. So this EV spread is happening so much. It's like everywhere globally. For the first time, some of the fastest growing markets were found in Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia. The trajectory laid out by these countries that came before them shows how EVs can surge from 5 to 25% in under 4 years. So it's happening. It's happening fast. It's happening as an inflection curve, as a exponential curve. And this is what happened. We've seen this time and time again with these new technologies. And as you said, electric vehicles are so much better. Television, smartwatches, there's an S-shaped curve. It's slow at the beginning and then boom, it skyrockets before hooking into a wave of mainstream acceptance. So that's where the 5% matters, right? As early adopters, it's 5%. Anything after that then becomes mainstream. The transition often hinges, as you just said, cost, lack of infrastructure, consumer skepticism. These things matter. The tipping point signals the flattening of this barrier. So these barriers are being put away, and then now it's go for it. And then, while each country's journey to 5% plays out differently, timelines converge in the years that follow, except for the US. That's the problem. And South Korea, apparently. So here's why. Corey Cantor, an EV analyst, said this: once enough sales occur, you kind of have this virtual cycle. More EVs popping up. You see it everywhere. It means more people seeing them as mainstream. You talk to people. You have friends now. You go to work. You'll have at least one person who has bought an EV, typically, depending on the state. Automakers more willing to invest in the market, and the charging infrastructure expanding on a good trajectory. All those are true except for the US. Automakers no longer willing to invest. The charging infrastructure has all been fantastic here. What's your thoughts on that?
There's another axis that we can use to evaluate this. I would say that remember that the only players right now that are really driving this EV adoption are Tesla in the United States and then the Chinese automakers primarily. While there are, Hyundai's kind of got some good ambitions, they're still not a major contributor to volume yet. The same can be said for players like Rivian or, Volvo in their transition or any of the other legacy companies. And so these other continents where all of a sudden we see EV adoption booming, those are largely driven by deliveries from Tesla and from Chinese automakers. And so the markets where those two players are going to be successful are going to be the markets where we see this adoption kind of booming. And one of the other elements that makes the United States market so much difficult is this is a market where we do have a lot of protectionism that exists based on the lobbying interests of the entrenched auto industry here, and it's been able to basically prohibit. Well, I wouldn't say prohibit. It's basically been able to slow walk the forces that it doesn't seem like the automakers in Europe have been able to, and that's a major factor that I think it's the fact that US automakers were so successful on their gasoline platforms that it's just taking them, because they were more successful, it's taking them longer in order to make this transition apart from Tesla. And Tesla is able to do a lot to saturate other markets in the rest of the world without getting into its lowest price EVs yet. That I think, one of the major inflections points where we'll see this trend change here in the United States is when Tesla really hits the next generation vehicle and they're able to sell sub $30,000 EVs really before even, federal tax incentives, and produce those in large volumes, in the millions and millions of units per year. That's going to be an inflection point where we do see a huge pickup in adoption rate here in the United States as well. And it's just taking time really to build out that whole supply chain here domestically. That supply chain just is more robust in China, and that's one of the reasons that Chinese automakers are able to ship, pretty decent quality, low cost EVs before we're able to do that here in the United States. They just have a better overall supply chain and supporting infrastructure and economy, to produce those vehicles in China at this point in time.
Yeah. We'll talk more about what's happening in the US. We'll talk about hybrids. First, let's take a look at this table. I love this table. This is a table that I've been searching for a long time, and now it's updated. This is the list of countries by country. What is the percentage of pure electric vehicle sales? Um, and then you can see here, they even have first quarter at 5% tipping point. So this is when they first got to the 5% tipping point. Norway is at 80%. All their car sales is 80% now. So it's a done deal for them. Of course, they're small. They only buy 25,000 per quarter, 100,000 a year cars, but still 80% they're now buying pure electric vehicles. And they look at that. They only hit it, they hit it a long time ago, 2013. That's why they're there. 2013, long time ago. Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Netherlands, Ireland, Belgium, Portugal, Switzerland. So European countries and the smaller European countries are the ones that really much further ahead. China's only at 23%. This is pure EVs. Now, if you add their hybrids, I've heard that they're at 40% and that they'll hit 50% by the end of this year. That's my understanding. But their 23% as sold is now electric vehicles. That's 1 in 4. So again, you just know it's going to go. But look how they're almost 2 million per quarter. This is crazy how many cars that they're buying. They are larger as a market than the U.S. is. People forget that. As a market,
that was a great point that Michael Dunn, makes, is that the Chinese auto market is really the preeminent auto market in the world at this point. And as American consumers, we kind of forget that they're a bigger and more important auto market than we are.
So they started in 2020, the end of 2020. That's when they hit their 5%. Now they're 23%. So that's 4 years later, 3.5 years, 3 years later, they're there. So, it's interesting that, and again, European countries, Germany is at 20%. Okay. But look at the US, way down here at 8%. We're at the bottom. We're at the bottom. South Korea, US, Estonia, Hungary. It's crazy, that we're down here at 8%. And let's find out why. And we hit this again 2020, so a year later than China, the 5%, and yet we got a flat growth. So that's why people think that their EVs are not popular, but that's only in the US. If you look at the globally, it is gone past the 5%. So why does the US underperform? And didn't arrive to land in 2021. That's relatively late for the country with its economic clout. Why? Because American drivers, they want the EVs with longer range, right? It's a big country. They like to drive farther than the earlier models offered. The US has preference for pickup trucks and large SUVs. They require bigger batteries. And then 2 years after crossing that 5%, the US still lags. It's only at 8%. And it's far short of the 18% average for 20 countries that was at the same point on the adoption curve. So they clearly did not grow. And the only country is the same as that is South Korea. Now, it says here, not a single country has taken more than 3 years to go from 5 to 15%. Well, it might look like that both the US and South Korea will break that trend and not get there at all. What's your thinking about what happened in the US and what's going to happen in the US?
The range anxiety point is an important one because, the United States specifically is a very large geographical country or a large country geographically, and a lot of the population is very spread out. It's a, very sparsely populated nation based on its size. And so that means not only do, consumers here in the US want to drive longer, it's almost that they have to. That, things are further apart here. Your family is going to be further away from you. There are less people that live in dense urban environments where you don't necessarily need that range. You've got the vast majority of the country is rural and requires you to drive at least 20 to 30 minutes just to get to a store that you want to shop at. And so, there's a reason for that range anxiety that Americans have. And I think that people that live in a lot of other countries don't understand the reason for that. I've never been to South Korea, so I'm not sure why they have a range anxiety that rivals or even surpasses us here in the United States. But I would be surprised if it wasn't based on some sort of a similar dynamic for them as well. And so, I think that is one of the challenges that EVs have specifically, is that we haven't been able to really get to high levels of convenience for consumers, from a range standpoint, both in terms of how far the vehicle can travel to begin with, and then how convenient is it to charge quickly. And so, those are some things that a lot of other markets, they don't have the same level. Those are not pain points that the consumers are going to feel to the same level that they feel them here in the US. And so we just have to continue the progression of the technology. And I think that we will lag. I think the US and South Korea are going to break the trend. They're not going to reach the 15% in 3 years, but it doesn't change the trend long term. It just means that it's going to play out a little bit slower than average here. But it's not going to change what is going to happen, over the next 10 years in any significant way. That as we do solve all the problems from a technology standpoint of making charging easy, fast, accessible, widely available, and it's going to be significantly cheaper than gasoline, that those range anxiety concerns are going to be addressed. The price points of the vehicles are going to come down initially, and they're just going to win in every dimension of cost over the long term. They're going to win in upfront cost, they're going to win in total cost of ownership, and they're going to be capable of providing the exact same convenience to people who are driving uh, as a gas vehicle. Like the all the trends in the technology are 100% clear and predictable on all of those fronts. And so, yeah, it's going to be fun. That's why we're investors in this company, is because the
Yeah.
data shows that this is an unstoppable transition that is overtaking the world, and we want to be beneficiaries of being early on that trend.
Yeah, the US is going to be very interesting, of course, because you've got the domestic legacy OEMs here, Ford, GM. They they're now going to start pushing hybrids as much as they can, and so the consumer may actually be confused. They may start doing that, but the only offering, the only great offering will be available will be Tesla, and so Tesla will just scoop up everything. So I don't expect Tesla's growth to be significantly hampered here in the U.S. because they'll just take the rest of the
Yeah.
growth with them. Now, there certainly is truth to the fact that, as we saw with the Q1 numbers, that there is a slowdown in the you maximize how many Model 3s you can sell and how many Model Ys you can sell. So the growth will be lower than it used to be in the last few years. But once the compact car comes, the Cybertruck is mass production next year. It's got a free way to just take over. Let's talk
Yeah.
hybrids. Go ahead.
Before we move forward a little bit, I think the larger vehicles piece is important, and Tesla is also kind of the once again, they've led in every major vehicle segment,
Mhm.
and I think they're going to continue to lead in the large vehicles as
Yeah.
well. Between the
Mhm.
semi and the Cybertruck, you really have two vehicles that show a lot of capability. Like, those are the technology demonstrations of what's going to be possible in those form factors over the long term. And Ford and Chevy, even to their credit, have created actually decent pickup trucks that are EVs now. They're going to struggle for a while still on being able to mass produce those platforms at scale at affordable costs. Like, their COGS control is going to be the thing that's a challenge for the F-150 Lightning and the Chevy Silverado EV. But Tesla's Cybertruck really shows, like, that platform is going to be very cost competitive from a COG standpoint with ICE vehicles, not with other EVs. And it's going to have all the same features and functionality and capability over the long term. It's still got a little ways to go in towing range, but that's another one of those technological challenges. It's a hard technical problem to solve that Tesla is once again proving can be solved. Just like people said, an electric semi is never going to be possible. Well, then why does it exist? Because it's here. Like,
And
and
500
that's what,
miles. Yeah,
yeah,
500
that's what
miles too.
Tesla's
It's
showing.
crazy.
And so it's just another. avenue that we can see, like we said earlier, this overall shift to electric vehicle technologies is unavoidable. It's coming. It's driven by the fact that the technology gets better every year and the costs come down every year. And if you apply those two trends, to every single vehicle segment over time, it's irrefutable. It's undeniable. There's no way that all of these things are not going to be fully electric in the next
Yeah,
10, 20
bumps in
years.
the road because of you're fighting with a legacy and they're shaping the consumer's minds. One of the things that they're doing is trying to say that hybrids is better. So while the analysis above is for vehicles that run on batteries only, some countries, especially primarily Europe, were quicker to adopt the plug-in hybrids. The U.S. mostly skipped over hybrids. That was last several years. They're going to do a huge push now. They have smaller batteries backed by gasoline-powered engines. They really are ICE cars, and then they just have that tiny little battery. But they're going to try to position themselves as well as they can. So the hybrids don't require the infrastructure. There's no issue of the range anxiety. Consistent tipping point for this broader category of EVs, when you include the plug-in hybrids, in addition to the fully electric, is 10%. The broader category of EV isn't reached until 10% of them are there. The US was just shy of that mark with 9.9% for the second half of 2023. So the plug-in hybrids is driving away. It's going away. So now this includes, including plug-in hybrids, 27 countries. So this is both plug-ins and EVs. Now we're at, they should really be calling this new NEVs. Here we are. So after the 5% hit here, now they're, as a 10%? Yeah, that's a 10% threshold. They get to close to 50%. Look at that. Within 2 to 3, 4 years. China is exceeding the pace for most plug-in pioneers. They're here. Okay, so tipping point for the world. This still leaves now. So this is interesting. 2/3 of the world's auto sales have now passed the EV tipping point. So that's just a third left, which is the rest of the world. A tipping point may be approaching for India, Indonesia, and Poland, significant auto markets where EVs have been on the rise. South America, a major push underway by China's BYD is going there now too. So, like I said, if you think of it based on US only, you'll be right to say, hey, it's not happening, it's slow. The domestic OEMs, they themselves have pulled back. They're going to be promoting their plug-in hybrids. But the reality is, electric vehicles is this skyrocketing is happening everywhere. That's why you hear somebody saying when they go, the growth story is over, or the EV is a blip or fad. No, dude, take a look at the world.
Yep. Yeah. Go back and listen to Herbert's great interview with Michael Dunn if that's what you think, and have your perspective challenged.
Thank you so much, Hans. Follow him on his YouTube channel, Hans C. Nelson. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.